Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first exciting SAP Security Week session. Today, we're going to talk about top pain points with Fiori authorizations. Our presenter today is Alessandro Banzer, our SAP Security and GRC expert here at Exciting LLC. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This is one of 6 sessions that we're having for the SAP Security Week webinars. We will have one each Thursday, today through March 16th. There's a link in the chat and in the handout section where you can see the upcoming sessions. You have to submit for each one of them each week separately, so it doesn't automatically sign you up for all 6. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can add them into the chat and we will look at them throughout and try to answer them at the end of the session. Just type in your questions into the control panel in the chat section. And at the end of this webinar, we will send you guys a recording. You will get an email from our marketing team, and if you have any additional questions that you want to have answered, you can either respond back to that marketing email, or you can email me at sjames@exciting.com, and we will get them answered to you offline. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Alessandro, and he's going to walk you through today's session.
Perfect. Thank you, Shelley. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about SAP Fiori, one of my most favorite topics. I had a lot of sessions in the past about that. Some of you might have joined those. So today, we will look into what are the top pain points when it comes to SAP Fiori authorization concepts, implementing SAP Fiori. I have a couple of slides prepared. We basically start with a very quick introduction of who we are, what is exciting, what do we do, and why are we here for. And then we'll look into the topic of SAP Fiori. I want to start with a quick overview so that everyone's on the same page when we start looking into the pain points, and then we'll address them. We'll just go through based on our experience, and we have done several Fiori implementations over the years, and I want to point out what are the hardest roadblocks, I would say, when it comes to implementing SAP Fiori. And obviously not just telling you what they are, I also want to provide you a couple of solutions, idea, thoughts, to help you be more efficient and be better prepared if you're struggling with Fiori implementation. And in the end, just quick wrap up, a couple of lessons learned, and then also if you have any questions that I will not be able to answer throughout the webinar, we'll just pick them up in the end. With that, just 1 minute, very brief. Who is Exciting? What do we do? Exciting has been around since 2008. We are founded and still headquartered in Switzerland. We have 135-ish employees as of today. We have offices throughout the world. We're obviously in Europe, in Switzerland, Germany, in the UK, in Romania, and also here in the United States. We have a global presence, have a growing company. We're an SAP Gold partner. We have different statuses. We have different certifications. So we're basically a solutions provider as well as providing consulting services. When it comes to our solutions, all our solutions are SAP certified. That means we're operating 100% in SAP standard. And we have different certifications, for example, for SAP S for HANA, for the private cloud. So if you need any of our tools, they're all fully SAP certified and also recommended by SAP. What do we do? In a nutshell, I have it here listed out in a couple of buckets. Obviously, we're very strong in the area of authorizations management. It's where SAP Fiori falls under as well. So we have a very strong solution to manage authorizations more efficiently, better, more securely. A lot of tools in that area when it comes to redesigns, RFC hardening, S/4HANA migrations, Fiori implementations, but then also day-to-day activities, integrations into SAP standard tools like access control, integration with transport management, making sure that everything we do when it comes to SAP security is always governed and always checked and compliant with our baseline. Obviously, we do a lot of areas. We have a lot of other areas that we touch on too. Security monitoring is a big topic, not just for on-prem, also for cloud applications. We do a lot of cloud security projects as well. a lot of GRC projects, IDM projects, single sign-on, HANA database. So basically the entire spectrum of SAP security that we're trying to support, either with tools or then with our knowledge and our experience in doing consulting. With that, I don't want to talk too much about ourselves, much rather talk about the topic. Just a very brief outlook for the SAP Security Weeks. Shelley already mentioned we have 6 sessions prepared. This is the first one of 6. Just here very quickly. So we're starting with Fiori today, and then we have a couple of other sessions where we'll talk about how we can automate and digitalize the role request and password reset, password self-service capabilities. We'll be looking into security monitoring. We'll talk about rule sets, why rule sets, and are they even any good, or it's just a waste of time? And then the last 2 will be more about the cloud. So we'll look into cloud services, primarily IES, IPS, IHE, to understand what they are and how we can use them for. And then last but not least, we'll wrap it up with understanding the challenges and how we can address the evolving challenges and the evolving issues we have with hybrid landscapes when we're adopting more and more cloud applications. With that, I want to start today with SAP Fiori, the first topic that we have planned. And I want to start with a very quick and high-level overview of what SAP Fiori is. SAP Fiori, when we talk in the context of S/4HANA, we all know it's the quote-unquote new user interface that we're now trying to implement. Fiori is not really new. It's been around since 2013, so it's almost 10 years. It's actually it's almost 10 years old, but it's really now getting traction. A lot of customers are adopting Fiori, especially also with the move to S/4HANA, with the ever-growing demand and requirement to implement cloud solutions. And Fiori has a lot of advantages there. The big advantage, obviously, for Fiori is that we have a unified user experience. We can see it here, whether I'm accessing Fiori from my desktop or from a tablet or mobile phone. It always looks the same, whether I'm accessing an on-prem application like an ERP, BW, CRM, or even SAP Access Control GRC, or then a cloud app, a cloud solution. SAP Fiori always looks the same. It feels the same. And so from that perspective, from a user experience perspective, it's super easy. It's easy to learn. It needs to be. We obviously have to train the users how to use Fiori properly. But once we understand how to use it, it's always the same. There's even possibilities to combine launchpads, so we can establish central launchpads where I'm able to access multiple applications that come from multiple different applications, whether they're on-prem, cloud, from one single central launchpad. So I don't even know which system I'm accessing. I'm just clicking the apps on my launchpad, and whether that app comes from S/4HANA or from ECC or from BW, it doesn't matter. It's a central launchpad. So there's a lot of advantages with Fiori, and that's also one of the reasons why obviously a lot of customers are now looking into implementing Fiori. So let's try to understand what that means from a roles and authorizations and the overall security impact that we have to, as security admins, that we have to understand and we have to be able to properly and securely implement. I think we're all very familiar with the old world. I call it here old world. It's obviously not old, it's still very relevant. But if we compare the old with a little bit the new Fiori world, we all know from a roles and authorizations perspective, we are very familiar with how we authorized and entered and accessed legacy transactions, SAP GUI transaction codes. We went to SAP GUI, entered transaction code, and there we were. From a authorizations perspective, what the user needed was obviously the authorization to a transaction code. The transaction code needed to be added to a role, whether that was through the role menu, which is the proper way of doing it, or whether it was even done manually in the authorization profile. Ultimately, the user just needed the access, the ST code authorization, plus some other authorizations for the transaction start and then the transaction execution itself. But it was pretty straightforward from an authorizations perspective, and we were able to easily authorize that if someone needed one. Now with Fiori, that changed a little bit. So what changed here is that now the front-end technology is different. We have, and we'll see that in the next slide when we look into the architecture. Fiori is a little bit different. It's still based on in the background, it's still ABAP, so we still have to deal with ABAP authorizations. We still are going to use PFCG, the profile generator. We can leverage SU24, for authorization proposals. But in addition to just adding like we did in the old world, like just adding a transaction to a role, we cannot do that anymore. Now all of a sudden we have to add a Fiori tile catalog, a business catalog or a technical catalog to the role menu that comes with the applications. So there's a new complexity, there's a new components that we have to understand. There's also new components that we have to build, whether it's the catalogs, but then also to display those apps on the Launchpad. We have either the new approach with spaces, pages, and sections, or then the old approach with the groups approach. And those have to be added to the roles as well, so that users are able to see the applications that they have access to on the Launchpad. So it's a couple of things that we have to understand, that we have to authorize, and that all needs to happen. So it's a little bit different. We're still using the same tools from a PFCG perspective, but there's new components that we have to understand. What does it mean from an architectural perspective? It ultimately means that the Fiori Launchpad runs on a front-end server. So we have a front-end server, and then we also have a back-end server. So what does that mean? That ultimately means that we have two different, let's call it components. We have a front-end component and we have a back-end component. That front-end component can be installed on the same system as the back-end. So if I have an S/4HANA and I want to enable Fiori, I can enable the front-end component on S4. And so then my S4 box is the front-end as well as the back-end. It is also possible to do more like what SAP calls a central hub deployment, where I have one dedicated front-end server, and then I connect to multiple backends, where I have physically two different systems, one's the front-end, one's the backend. Regardless of the implementation that we choose, and you can see here the recommendation is to go with the embedded approach, which means that the front end runs on the backend server, so it's like a one-to-one relationship. But regardless of the approach, whether it's embedded or in the central hub, we always have front end and backend. That also means we always have front end authorizations and backend authorizations. So there are certain front end authorizations that we have to authorize, and also certain backend authorizations that we have to authorize. So that's always given, that's a fact. If you have an embedded installation, it's pretty straightforward because we're building a role, we're adding the catalog. The catalog pulls in the applications, for example, the UI5 applications, or it might be a legacy application that calls like a transaction code or web GUI. But if it's embedded, the system knows, okay, it's front-end and backend, and it will add all the authorizations, so start authorizations for front-end as well as for backend. If we have a central hub deployment where we have physically two different servers, then we have to add front-end authorizations on the front-end server and back-end authorizations on the back-end server. So there's a little bit more complexity that we have to understand. It's not rocket science, we just have to be aware of that. And if we go with the embedded installation, it's it's not too difficult to deal, because PFCG is well capable of adding the correct authorizations to our PFCG rules. So I don't want to talk too much about the basics, because obviously a lot of you guys know the basics or have been in previous webinars. So let's talk about a couple of pain points and what we can do and what are solutions to address those. What we have seen from various implementations is 5, 6, 7, probably like go up to 10 different pain points that a lot of customers struggle with, and I've tried to combine them as much as I can here. One of the first thing is always, activation of services. We know that certain services, ICF nodes need to be active. That's a challenge because Fiori, the communication on the front end, it's a little bit different. There's a different technology. There's different protocols for the communication between an UI5 application and the backend. So communication through a OData channel. It's OData protocol. So we need OData services. Also need OData authorizations for that. Then with Fiori, we have new or an enhanced form of how authorizations checks are implemented on the coding side. We talk it, or we call it CDS views or CDS authorizations. CDS stands for Core Data Services. We'll talk about those because that's a obviously a big topic for a lot of customers because they're struggling with that. So we'll look into that. Then one other problem is always role transport. How do we transport roles? If I move a role, it doesn't move the Fiori objects with it. And there's some inconsistency, and it's sometimes very difficult to make sure that everything is properly transported, especially when we have large implementations, meaning there's a lot of people working on the implementation from a role building side, S24 side, but also Fiori front-end component side, building groups, or then the pages spaces, and also the catalogs. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be, or that needs to be created, and also needs to be transported up to production for a go live. One other thing is also when it comes to authorizing Fiori applications, Fiori still, in the backend, we still have to deal with ABAP authorizations, but with S/4HANA, especially with S/4HANA, there were a lot of simplifications. It's a principle of one where we have a lot of cockpit applications that allow users to do multiple scenarios and covers different use cases, and those applications need to be properly authorized. And so it's very difficult to have a stringent concept there, and that's also one thing that a lot of customers struggle. So we'll look into that. And then last but not least, obviously in SAP standard there are tools. A lot of the tools got much better. We have in the beginning we had to work with the Launchpad Designer. I think all know that nowadays we have the content manager, the app manager, and different tools, and also analyze these tools in the background that allow us to understand what's going on and build the content more efficiently. There's still a lack of tool. There's still a lot of stuff that's missing. There's third-party solutions come in that can help with those that we want to look into as well. So with that, let's start with the first one. So mass activation of services. Why do we have to activate services? As I mentioned, the Fiori UI5 applications, it's a different architecture. They work differently, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to be activated. So we have, first of all, when we start with Fiori, we have a couple of I call it baseline services that need to be activated. Just so that the Fiori Launchpad works, that all the applications, like the core applications, work. But then obviously, as soon as we start implementing and activating applications for our end users, we have to make sure that all those ICF nodes are active, and also that the OData services are activated. So if you're going, if you're starting with 50 applications, we have to activate all the services behind those 50 applications. If we add on another 50, we have to activate it for those 50. It's never recommended to go for all, just activate them all. We never want to do that. So we always, definitely want to follow a least privilege approach there as well. Just the what need to know kind of principle. So don't overdo it. So in the beginning we had to do it, rather manually. So what we can do nowadays is there's a transaction code that's called ST01, which is the task list transaction. In the task list transaction, what can we do? We have roles and scenarios where we can automatically activate content. There's a scenario to activate the baseline. So we have all the standard configuration, all the services activated. That's one. But then we can also activate all the services that we need for our business applications. That's definitely one thing to do it, to use the task list. Pretty straightforward. I typically use that one because it does it for me. Why doing it manually when I can just click and wait until it's done for 5 seconds later? So that's definitely one transaction to definitely keep in mind. The other one, a couple of years ago, SAP released the content manager, the SAP Fiori content manager. I have the transaction code here as well. In the content manager is a great tool. I personally use it a lot, especially when you work with Fiori. I don't want to use the Launchpad Designer anymore because it's web-based, it's slow. I cannot really do everything, and I don't have the insight into all the details that the content manager provides. The content manager also has the ability to run certain consistency checks. So if we're building catalogs and we're adding applications to the catalogs and the target mappings and all the tiles and stuff, what we can do is we can check the services. We can check the underlying services of those applications, and then content manager will check whether they are active or not. And if they're not, it will point it out and we can see it, and then we can activate it right from there. We can just jump to the next T code that allows us to activate those services, and then we can also do the ones that we have missed, maybe because we didn't do it or because there's a new application that came into picture. We can also manually activate them directly out, starting from the content manager. A great tool there to definitely use that. When it comes to again, when it comes to activating the services, definitely don't activate all of it, because that's definitely a security risk. Cybersecurity, cyber attacks is a real threat nowadays. So keep the exposure as small as you can. There is thousands of apps. SAP is releasing apps every single day. Most customers don't need thousands of apps. If you need 100, why activating 2,000 services? Activate 100 you need, and keep the footprint small. That from a security perspective is definitely the right approach, especially now with the content manager, where we don't have to fear too much whether I'm missing a service or not, and I have to manually find it out through the the debugging and stuff. We don't have that issue anymore. So as content manager, we can just check it, and before we give applications to the end users, we can make sure they're all active, and then the user shouldn't have an issue that goes back to inactive services. One other big topic, not just for Fiori, it's a new concept, a new approach altogether, are the CDS views, core data services. What core data services are is basically a different way of accessing data from the database. And the difficulty there is that the authorization check doesn't tell us what is failing. And I'll explain on the next slide what that means in detail. So it's basically what CDS views do for us, and what they do is it's basically instance-based authorization checks. So it's retrieving the authorizations a user has, and then showing or retrieving the data from the database based on the user's authorizations. So from an overall security perspective, this is the greatest thing, because we're not loading something from the database that the user is not authorized to see. So the authorization check is part of the data pool from the database. But that has a little bit an issue, or creates a problem for us authorization admins, because you don't see what's failing. We don't have an authorization check that says, hey, user doesn't have authorization to company code 1000, because we won't see that. And why is that, and how does it work, and what's the solution there? And I have here the solution. We don't really have a solution. It is what it is. We have to understand it, and we have to make sure that we find ways around it to understand why it's happening, what we have to look out for, and then understand the tools that we can use to still find out why something is not working. Might be a little bit more manually comparing rather than just trusting a trace. But this is what it is. It is what it is for a lot of Fiori applications. It's also for S/4HANA, and a lot of the S/4HANA applications, something like just standard applications, like if you go to MM03, for example, to open up materials, there's now CDS views that control the data pool. So we not only see this in Fiori, it's also in S4, and this is definitely the way forward, because it's more performant. It's, from a security perspective, the right thing to do. So what's the big challenge, or what's the big change here? On the left-hand side, I have here the classical approach, how this works in the old world, ERP, ECC, in most cases. Basically, let's say the user is retrieving data, because we're running, let's say we're an MM03, let's keep it a simple example. We're an MM03, and I want to see all the materials that are available. So I do like an F4 lookup. I just click the match code, the F4, and say what materials are available in the system. Today, in the old world, how this works is that basically the program will do a database pull, and will do like a select star from table. So it will pull all the materials from table MARA for the material master, for example. It will come back into the memory, and then there will be an authorization check based on those on the data, and we'll say, hey, is Alessandro authorized to access material 1? If yes, show it. Is he authorized to access material 2? No, he's not. Don't show it, and so on. So we'll basically do an authorization check as we go along, and that's what we can see. So in the trace, if I'm on the material master, it will be with the material group, for example. So if you have an authorization check for MATIMAT or MATIMAR, I can see that I'm failing on a material group that I'm not authorized. And I can see which one it is because I passed one, return code 0 on one material group, but I failed on another one. And those materials I'm not able to see. So far so good. So we know as an authorization admin, or if someone sends me an SU53, I know exactly what he was trying to do or what authorization is missing. In most cases, obviously not always, but in most cases it's obvious what's missing, and I can authorize it, based on the trace or SU53 authorization right there. Now with the new approach with the CDS use, it's a little bit different. So when the application pulls the data from the database, it's basically using my authorizations. So here I have the example with bookers. If we stick with the example of the material master where I'm pulling from table Mara, it would consider my BEGRU authorization for the material authorization group. So when the data is pulled from database, it's only giving me back what I'm authorized to see. So there was an authorization check because the CDS obviously needs to know my authorizations, but the authorization checks will just be on the activity. So for example, if I do a match code, if I just want to see all the materials available in MM03, it will be an authorization check on activity F4, because that's what controls the match code. Or if I open a material, it will be on 03. But I won't see the BEGRU. It will just check what I have on BEGRU, and if I have one BEGRU value but not the others, I won't see that because it was just checking what do I have. It got it back, and then based on that, I get the material spec that I'm authorized to see. So in the trace or in SU53, the return code will be 0. We will see the CDS entity. Then we know it was a CDS view, but we won't see that there was a specific failure on material group 1, for example. That's the biggest challenge there. So what can we do? The only solution really is to analyze and compare ourselves. There is a runtime simulator in transaction SACM, where we can test the authorizations of a user for CDS. So we can basically take that CDS entity that we see in the trace and check that and run a simulation against another user. Then I can see which authorizations are considered for that pull. And then I see, okay, that user has on BEGRU, he only has material group 1. There probably are more. And if I compare with another user, maybe another user has 3 material groups, then I can see the user's missing some authorizations there. So it's a little bit tricky. Keeps our job interesting. SACM, a great transaction for that to compare. You can also use the user buffer. SU56 is a great transaction for that too, to just specifically look for one object that's being checked in a CDS entity, and then you see one was the activity, the other field very likely was what was used for the authorization check. Most of those authorization objects we know anyway, so we kind of know which field it means that we have to check. But this is obviously definitely a challenge, because sometimes when we just trace and run user tests, the user say, hey, I don't think it works, or I don't see all of it. And then you check a trace or SU53 and there's nothing in there. You're like, no, actually, authorization wise, you're good, but you're not. So keep that in mind. CDS views, a little bit of challenge from that perspective. It is what it is. There's no better way of doing it at the moment. So just keep that in mind. The next thing that I always find very challenging is when it comes to role transports and transporting all the Fiori stuff. So there's no standard tools to mass transport. So if you want to mass transport all my catalogs, all my pages, spaces, groups, there's nothing like that. It's always a one by one. A little bit unfortunate. If you use the Launchpad designer and we do some changes, it only records the objects while we're changing them. So if I do a change, then it asks me for transport and adds it to transport. A little bit unfortunate there as well. The same thing with the content manager. In the content manager, we can obviously add catalogs to a transport, and we can do it one by one, but it's one by one. So if I create 200 catalogs and I want to transport 50 of them, I 50 times add it to a transport. The good thing is I don't have to make a change to it to be added to the transport like we had to do with the Launchpad Designer. We can just say, hey, transport, and it will transport it. So that's a little bit of a challenge, but again, it is what it is. In standard, there's not much we can do. Then also sometimes you have a little bit the tricky part between what are workbench objects versus customizing objects. So for example, technical catalogs are client independent, so they're workbench, versus then the business catalogs, spaces, pages, sections, or if you're still using groups, they're client dependent, so they're customizing objects. So depending also where we are and what we want to transport, it doesn't offer us that option. So if we're in a client and want to transport like a workbench object, and we have sometimes challenging. So that's also one thing that we cannot really distinguish between what is a customizing object, a workbench object, and specifically transport that. So that's a little bit the challenge, that there's no good way. Solutions there is definitely only using third-party tools. We have Exciting has tools for that, where we can mass transport, where we can do different things to check that. That's especially helpful if you have large implementations. I'll get back to it in a second here as well. I have one more slide where we're recommending some third-party tools, just because SAP standard doesn't offer that. Also with third-party tools, especially with our tools, we can also select specifically whether we want to transport customizing objects or workbench objects, or both. Oops, apologize. And just a more efficient way to do that. There's also standard integrations with SAP standard transactions, obviously. So this is just standard with just better features, better manageability on those transports. I have here a screenshot, how we do that. So if you want to mass transport, we have here on the right hand side, if you want to mass transport all your catalogs, all your spaces, all your pages, they all start with a Z, do Z star, and just transport them. And you can see we can select from whether it's customizing scope or configuration scope, workbench scope, and then just transport them across the landscape. The same also for translations. Translations is a big topic as well, because Fiori objects need to be translated too. There's also a struggle in SAP standard. Also third-party tools like ours, is the role replicator, our tools that does everything for Fiori. That's all part of that, whether it's creating content, whether it's to mass create catalogs, to mass create spaces, pages, sections, to update them, to must delete, must assign, all that's very difficult. Definitely also something where third-party tools need to come in to be more efficient. Unfortunately, fortunately for us, but unfortunately from a customer perspective, there are no mass tools, at least not as of today. And so Fiori implementations from that perspective can be just a challenge, because we have to implement a lot, we have to configure a lot, we have to create a lot of content initially, and that can be a burden, that can really be a roadblocker, and sucks up a lot of resources to implement. So third-party tools are definitely the way to go there. And you can use tools like ours for an implementation project for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, just to get over that first hurdle of implementing. So that's definitely one thing to look out for if you have a large project or any type of project for Fiori. One other big topic with Fiori is always when it comes to the authorization concept of how do we do that. With S/4HANA, and a lot of you guys probably do Fiori with S4. We all know with S/4HANA, a lot of things change. S/4HANA with the new data model, with all the simplifications for HANA, S/4HANA. What happens there is the goal is what SAP calls a principle of one. And principle of one means a reduction of applications. You know that from an S4 migration, a lot of transactions become obsolete. They will just go away. We have to have the replacements authorized for our end users on the GUI side. So a lot of the transactions to do master data, customer master, vendor master, they're now all integrated into BP, the business partner transaction. BP, nothing new, like Fiori, been around for many years. I think it was introduced with CRM many years ago, but now with S/4HANA, that BP approach is definitely enforced, and that means we have to reauthorize our end users. We have to give them new transaction. For the master data will be BP, but then that BP transaction, like many other transactions, need to be properly authorized. Why is that? Because in BP, if I have access to BP and I don't have those authorization objects under control, that ultimately means that a user that might do customer master data will just be able to do vendor master data too, because we don't have it under control. So we definitely have to be very cautious of how do we do authorizations with those new applications, not just the GUI, also for Fiori, because with the reduction, we have applications that allow us to do multiple different use cases and scenarios, and they need to be properly authorized. Here a spelling mistake. I just see this is actually Migo, but just a couple of examples where we see this very commonly, that we have to be very careful with the authorizations. One other thing as well is with Fiori, it's always the question, where do we add Fiori from an authorizations perspective? Fiori, in our understanding, must be added to the existing authorization concept. So we shouldn't build a authorization concept for just Fiori. It will go hand in hand with the authorizations we have on S4. So the Fiori content, the catalogs, the spaces, pages, or even if you're using the groups, they should be added to the existing authorization concept. The authorizations from Fiori to a GUI transaction to restrict business data, business authorizations will be exactly the same. It's the same authorization objects. Obviously, there's a couple of other ones for Fiori. Like start authorizations are different. But when it comes to business data, it's the same authorization object. So whether I'm accessing materials from a GUI transaction or whether I'm accessing materials from a Fiori application, in the background we have our mmati object, whether it's mmati-mat, mmati-mar, all those will be the same. They will be the same for Fiori, they will be the same for SAP GUI. So it definitely makes a lot of sense to integrate and include the Fiori content into our existing authorization concept, where we have restrictions in place and we can repurpose them without having to redo that just for Fiori roles. So it definitely should be into one. What a lot of customers struggle, that's, I think it's just given sometimes, because we're lacking some knowledge and or just getting our feet wet, and we're under pressure. Very often security is an afterthought. You don't think security from the start, so it's always a challenge with security. But what we shouldn't forget, when we go to S/4HANA or when we implement Fiori, we cannot leave the compliance aspect out of the door. It cannot do that. So we still have to follow least privilege principles, the need to know principle, also for Fiori. Just because someone doesn't see something, we shouldn't give star or sub all or like extensive authorizations. So we still have to follow the exact same things there. Now, what we have with, especially with S/4HANA, with the newer NetView releases, there's an enhanced form of transaction code SU24. So SU24 is the authorization proposal database where we can do authorization proposals for any type of application that can be added to a role through the role menu, whether it's a transaction code, function module, but then also for the Fiori components. And the better SU24, the better our proposals are in or during the role building when we add applications to a role. In the past, that's called in the old world, before we had this enhanced form of SU24, the challenge with SU24 was that we were only able to maintain the lowest common denominator. So if we had applications, especially now with the principle of one, where we have cockpit applications, as I call them, like Migo, BP, that can do multiple things depending on the use case and depending on the job and the person that's accessing it, we were not really able to commit too much authorization values into SU24, because one user used BP or Migo to display, another one used it to create, another one was changing, one user was creating or had to display customers, others had to display vendors. So we couldn't really put too much into SU24, and all we very often proposed was the object, and then it was up to us in the role to figure out the restrictions. That obviously always there's the risk that in the role we don't know what. Let's just double click. It will be a star. At least it works. So we'll figure it out later. And so we introduced a lot of wildcard authorizations, asterisks, and far-reaching authorizations. And that was a challenge, and we couldn't do any better on the SU24 side because of that limitation. Now with the enhancement of SU24, which in between was called SU24N, that was actually, I think, on S/4HANA. I'm not 100% sure, but I think in S/4HANA 2020 and 2021, it was SU24N, and now in S/4HANA 2022, it's now back into SU24. So there was first a new version of SU24 in SU24N, and that SU24N is now SU24. So in S/4HANA 2022, it's just SU24, but it is that enhancement that SAP did. And the enhancement is ultimately that we can do multiple variants of authorization proposals for an application. So what does that mean? We can see here on the left-hand side, might be a little bit small, but let me talk you through that. We have here a transaction code, which is BP, business partner. Remember, we master data, we can display, change, create, all of the sort for vendor, for customer, and so on. And you can see here on the left-hand side, I have now different variants. These are SU24 variants for this transaction code. What does that mean? That means I have here like a variant, it's called ZBP display. And for this display variant, I can now go ahead and maintain specific values. So I can say, because it's display, let's lock the activity down to 03, F4, and maybe 08. No 01, no 02, nothing else, it's just locked to display. I could even go ahead and say, hey, let's do this for display customer, and even lock it down to customer. So what I can do now here is I can build multiple variants, and then I can reuse them in the role. So I can do more work and more of my thinking that I have to otherwise do down the line directly in SU24. Okay, so I can build variants and fully authorize them. So ultimately, if we add a T code to a role, in the best case, we have it fully authorized directly out of SU24. How does that work on PFCG side? Super straightforward. We add a T code, or not just T code. I'm talking here any application, can be for Fiori, can be a function module, web service, web to Impro, you name it. But here, just simple example with a transaction code, and again, BP. So I add BP to the role menu, and then there will be a new tab that's called Applications. And in the Applications tab, what I can now do is I can select the variants for those transaction codes. So we can see that here. I have for my transaction code BP, for the business partner, I have multiple variants. And I can select one or many. You can see here, I can select 2 or 3. And then it will propose those authorizations into the authorization data. And so with that, the more I do on the SU24 side, the better my authorization proposals will be in the role. So this is great for us, especially for the ones of us that have always used SU24 and are big believers in SU24. Now we can really do a lot of the thought processes that always went in, that we had to do in the role. We can do that once and forever in SU24. And then whether we're going to add that T code 1 time or 17 times, if we know in that role they needed to display customer master, select the variant for customer master, and it's fully proposed all the way down if you want to. That's a big enhancement. That's a huge time saver in my opinion. Obviously, some work needs to happen up front. Again, there are tools. We have tools for that too that help us figure it out a little bit better. But this is definitely a great enhancement, to get better and have a better, more solid authorization concept implemented. In the long term, in the long run, this will save you a tremendous amount of time, because now we can really and fully propose everything through SU24. There will be no more excuses saying, oh, this was just a one-off case where I had to do it because otherwise I would have. No, just do it now with a variant. No more excuses. It will be done properly. and all the roles, all we want to see is standard and maintained, nothing changed, nothing manually, 100% SAP standard. This is a great thing. Also for Fiori, not just for transactions. So keep that in mind, and inform yourself what SAP24 can do for you with this new enhancement. The other one, the last one that I have is obviously a little bit, and obviously this was more in the earlier stages of Fiori. In the beginning, we had really a lack of tools, and I think that was also one of the reasons why the customer acceptance and the implementation thereof was always a bit of struggle. Obviously, also because there were significantly less applications than that are available today. But obviously, there were a lot of tools missing for us security admins to properly implement this, and especially productivity tools. So, as I was already mentioning, with the Launchpad Designer, for those of you that have used Launchpad Designer, what a slow tool. I mean, unreal. You had to click and wait and click and wait and click and wait. And I'm a fast guy. I talk fast and I try to be fast. Very, very difficult. So that definitely changed now. So there's new and enhanced tools. I mean, the Launchpad Designer, we now got the Content Manager. I mentioned that if you're not familiar with Content Manager, definitely look into that. It's a great tool. It's a great tool to maintain business catalogs. So whenever you're dealing with catalogs, use Content Manager. When you start Content Manager, it takes 4 or 5 seconds to load because it's loading all the content. But once it's loaded, it's fast. You click, it does. You click, it does. So it's not like Launchpad Designer. You're waiting once in the beginning. You take, a sip of coffee, and then after that, you can work for hours and you won't have to wait. So this is a great tool. Also, the abilities within Content Manager, not just that it's faster. Obviously, there's much more insight you get. You have relationships between roles to groups, to catalogs, catalogs to tiles, tiles to roles, and so on. And you can check services. It's just a great tool with copy features. Makes your life so much easier using Content Manager. The downside there still, it's all one by one. You're creating one catalog, you're adding one tile, you're adding one target mapping. It's always one-to-one. It's in individual maintenance, but at least it's fast. And if you just have to do day-to-day changes, it's a great tool. The same thing for technical catalogs. We now have the App Manager, maybe a little bit more for when we do custom UI5 apps, but there obviously now we have the App Manager. We can use the App Manager to build our technical catalogs that we then can use in our business catalogs, content-wise with a reference. So also there, a great tool with the App Manager. Over the years, the Fiori apps library, the reference library that we should all be familiar with. If you're not, just Google Fiori apps library, you will get right there. You need an S user to access it, where you can see all the apps, where you can see all the implementation information, how it has to be configured. That now also supports multi-language. Before it was just English, so we have that support there as well, which is great for international customers. And one other big enhancement, definitely from an end user perspective, was that switch from groups over to the spaces, pages, sections. If you have not done that yet, we have separate webinars. Just go and look on our website on the on-demand webinars where we have sessions. We have one specific session where we talk about spaces, pages, sections, and also how you can migrate from groups over, because that's from an end user perspective a significant change. Makes it so much easier to access. It's more structured. It's not like just like with the groups. If you had a lot of groups, a lot of apps, you just had a massive front page. It was just a one page. You had to scroll all the way down, and then you had a horizontal scroll bar. That all will be gone with spaces, pages, sections if done right, obviously. So from that perspective, a lot more can be done with it. We can really build a nice navigation and a nice design for end users. That's definitely also one thing to look into. The last thing that I want to mention here as well, and obviously third-party tools are great, and exciting is obviously a big provider in that area. But you can see here with SAP, that's also the lack of tools I'm mentioning. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the tools, they got better, like Content Manager, great tool, should have been there 10 years ago, in my opinion. But it's all individual maintenance. So like I said, we're creating one catalog, we're making one change, we're assigning one catalog to a role, and so on. It's always one by one. And if you're doing big implementations where we have to create hundreds of catalogs, and assign hundreds, if not thousands of apps to those catalogs and then building the pages and the spaces. That's a lot of work. And there's no mass tools for that. If you look into like our tool with the XAMS, with the role replicator, we can automate all that. We can have mass features for all of that, whether it's transporting, as I was showing, whether it's mass translation, another big topic. How do we translate if we have a lot of apps that need to be translated, catalogs, pages, space that need to be translated? We have the tools for that. Upload, download, just upload a file from Excel, it processes it, done. The same when it comes to creating catalogs, changing catalogs, deleting catalogs, creating, changing, maintaining spaces, pages, groups. All that can be done with our tools. So that's very important. One last thing as well there. What a lot of customers are missing is from a Fiori perspective, usage. We don't know, especially when we have Fiori, maybe we do like a POC or a sandbox, and then we want to see what was, which apps were used. But also then going forward, customers that implemented Fiori 2, 3, 4 years ago, and add a lot of apps, and they're like, hey, we kind of have to redesign Fiori, but which apps are actually used? There's no real usage. Also there, if we're using tools like ours, we have the ability to also do Fiori usage, and we can use that information to then redesign to understand what users have used, how often they have used it, when they have used it, and then based on that information can do a redesign and build a least privilege approach, a need to know approach also for redesigned Fiori authorization. So definitely one thing to look into. There's a lot in standard that you can do, but if you want to be more efficient and faster and save you tons of hours, definitely look into third-party tools. With that, so a lot of a couple of pain points. There's obviously others, and if you guys have done Fiori implementations, there's you probably had some other struggles, and there's always struggles in projects. Nothing goes as smooth as we hope, but it's always good to inform yourself what's available. And a lot of stuff is available. There's solutions for a lot of the struggles we have. You just have to know them and look for them, and that's why we're here for. A couple of lessons learned. Again, with Fiori as a quote unquote new user interface, like I said, it's 10 years old, so not very new, but definitely integrate it within your existing authorization concept. Don't go separate for it. Don't build a separate authorization concept just for Fiori. It's best integrated into your existing authorization concept. Also, it might save you, or it definitely saves you a lot of time, because if you build separate roles for just Fiori, you have to deal with all the business authorizations. So if you have apps that pull data for materials, you have to authorize it, unless you just say, hey, it's like in between, but you don't want that. So if you add it to your existing roles where you have restrictions in place, then it's in the same roles, so same proposals, and some of the fields might already be maintained because they're proposed from others. So there's a great chance to repurpose what you have already restricted in your current design, because there's always a reason why you restrict certain things, and you should do the same, exactly the same for also for Fiori. Fiori is a little bit complex, especially with the architecture, with front and back end, start authorizations, the catalogs, the group spaces, all that stuff. But it's nothing to shy away from. It's just something we have to learn. The good thing is it's still ABAP. So we still have our ABAP transactions, PFCG, SE24, we can run the traces. So we're still in a familiar environment. We just have to understand and learn a little bit those details. Again, if you go to our, if you want to learn more, just go to our website. There's the on-demand webinars. We have, I think, like 10 different sessions about Fiori, from the very basics all the way down to authorization debugging. So there's, I think, a little bit for everyone here to learn more, depending on where you are in your journey there. Also in Fiori, and I just have here more as a comment, SAP all is not SAP all any longer in Fiori. Even though if you have SAP all, you still have all the authorizations. But what I mean with that is, if you have Fiori, sometimes users might not see a tile, and they're like, hey, I don't have the authorizations. They might have SAP all, but they still don't see the tile. That can be because they're missing a catalog. So they don't have the catalog that shows the tile, then they cannot see it. Technically, we all know, and I'm pretty sure someone will correct me in the chat, technically you still can access all the applications. If you know the URL, you can still access it. And I'm pretty sure someone will correct me on that. But I just want to say that, if users face issues, they can be totally authorized, but they might not see it because they might be missing a catalog, so they don't see it, not even in their app finder, or maybe it's not showing up on their groups or on their spaces and pages because it's not added from a catalog. Even though they're authorized and they have it in a catalog, it might not be displayed on their front end, on the Launchpad. So there's a couple of different issues, I will call them, that can happen. So if user, even though they're fully authorized, even with SAP All, you might not see it. Doesn't mean that you're not authorized, but you still might not see it, and the users, regular standard end users, might not be able to access it. So just keep that in mind, that there's different components that come into the picture. And when you start implementing Fiori, it's not just that you're doing it yourself. If you're like an authorization administrator, very often it also includes basis developers. If you do custom applications, there's a couple of, like, especially with the task list, the activation of basis components. That's something that you need the basis team for as well. If you're doing Fiori exploration and look into applications, your end users might go on the Fiori app site and say, hey, this is a pretty cool app, can you give me that one? And you don't find it. Why not? Because maybe you're missing the front-end component, and then basis needs to install the front-end component first that brings the Fiori applications, so you can authorize it. So that's always involves different stakeholders, so keep that in mind. It's not just that it's all you as a security admin. You might need some other people there as well. From an end user perspective, definitely something worth investing time from a training perspective. It's like a train once and use forever kind of deal, in my opinion, until we get the next user interface. But it's definitely worth it to invest enough time to train the end users so they properly understand. There's features like SU53. There's something like that in Fiori. It's just not SU53 anymore. We have different tools for that. So we have authorization failures can be seen. There is even e-learning that can be integrated. So different things that we can do for end users, and it's definitely worth investing into that, because that will keep the tickets for I don't see the tile or I cannot find this definitely low. So always good to do that. The last thing I wanted to mention here, I didn't write it down, but one thing for sure, when you go to S/4HANA, when you implement Fiori, don't forget about your compliance. Don't forget about GRC, your GRC rule set, whether that's in SAP Access Control or whether you have IAG or any other third-party tool that does SOD analysis. Don't forget about that. So that's sometimes that, I had customers that said, hey, I went to S4 and I have less SOD conflicts. Yeah, great. You don't have the new transactions in your rule set. That's why. Actually, you have more. You just don't know it yet. So keep that in mind when you migrate, when you implement. Also, don't forget about the Fiori, the compliance side of it. Your auditors will tell you sooner or later when they find out. So keep that in mind as well. With that, I think Fiori overall a great, very exciting new technology, new platform, new way of working for, I would say, the majority of our end user population. Definitely not for everyone. There is a lot of investment going into Fiori, so it's definitely worth looking and be interested in that route. I mentioned the central launchpad service earlier. It's the central launchpad in the cloud, like a cloud service where you can connect multiple backends into one central launchpad. That's a great way, for example, to expose applications to the internet. So our end users, whether it's our people or our vendors or customers, can access applications. Might be one way of doing that. You can also keep it internally if you don't want to do that. So different ways that you can use and gain advantages with Fiori. With that, let me take a very quick preview into the questions. I see just a few ones there. Oh yeah, I saw one typo as well earlier in the task list, and I might have to apologize for that. The transaction code for the task list is STC01. When I said ST01 before, it sounded wrong, but then I looked at the slide. I was like, no, I guess I had it right yesterday. I don't need the slides, but it must have been late. So I apologize for that. Yes, the T code for the task list is STC01. So there's a C for that I missed in the slide. So I apologize for that. Then let me see what else we have. There's a question about best practices, standard roles. Yeah, so when it comes to Fiori, obviously there's standard roles, there's standard business catalogs, and even groups or spaces pages in standard. In my opinion, use them as you always did with the SAP standard roles in ABAP. Use them for a sandbox, use them as a reference, but don't authorize them to your end users. So always use your own custom roles, your custom catalogs, your custom spaces pages, and authorize those properly. The reason for that is if you do an upgrade and you're using standard roles or you're using standard catalogs, if you upgrade the system, those catalogs, those roles will be overwritten. And if possibly you have made some changes, maybe you restricted certain things because those business roles, there is a star, everything is starred out. So maybe you have made some restrictions and in do an upgrade, you forget about them and your end user have wide open authorizations. Or SAP takes something out, users lose access. So I would never go with SAP standard stuff other than just using it as a reference to understand, maybe how SAP builds like jobs, for example, or then in a sandbox environment, and if you just want to play around, I wouldn't worry about the authorizations. I would just give them those standard roles. One good thing is also in SU25 you can create what's called a SAP app role, all the application authorizations. That might also be one good thing to look into when you do sandbox environments. Then last question, then I think we're over time, so I have to hurry up. So I'm careful of everyone's time here. So it was a question regarding Fiori and SAP GUI, coexistence. Obviously, it depends. So obviously you can run transaction codes that are not Fiori, just regular SAP GUI transactions like SU01, PFCG on the Fiori Launchpad. So we can enable those transactions and so that the user can run them on the Launchpad. But it's still the SAP GUI transaction. It looks like a Fiori app, not quite. It's not like built specifically for Fiori. It's more just enabled or rendered for UI5. It's still the legacy transaction from SAP GUI, behaves exactly the same, just maybe looks a little different than SAP GUI. You can obviously do that. So for a lot of end users, when they go into Fiori and let's say they have 80–90% of the transaction codes are replaced with Fiori apps, and you have like a couple left that they need as well, but there's no Fiori app for it. For sure, it's a good idea to enable them in Fiori so that they can entirely work on the Launchpad. So don't have to have the coexistence between SAP GUI and Fiori. That's ultimately the idea, to have the majority of the end users entirely in Fiori. Obviously, coexistence is possible, but whenever possible, I would avoid it and get them entirely into Fiori. With that, if there's any more questions that we haven't answered, I'll go through the list later. I will we'll try to answer them offline in an email. With that, just once again, sign up for the next sessions, very interesting sessions. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to reach out either to myself or Shelly, or just to our company email. I have my email here on the next slide as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to just email. And with that, I thank everyone for your attention. I apologize for the, how many minutes? 4 minutes, that it took too long. I think it was Shelly's introduction, which was too long. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I'm looking forward to the next session. I will be hosting the very last one when we talk hybrid landscapes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Took up my closer. Thank you. See you guys next week.